Started. Huh?
Ruth will be here.
Okay. He's my gingerbread. I brought some almonds for Kevin, but Kevin's not here, so we should all eat Kevin's almonds and show him. Okay, I wanted to start with a recap. Let me just start with Scripture. That's always a good idea. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were saying this question as a trap in order to have a basis of accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. That's our paradigm for creativity. Jesus creating a space in time, which is what art does, creating a space in time. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you that is without sin throw the first stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. So he does it twice, which is particularly infuriating, which is one of the things I really love about him. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. Neither do I condemn you." Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." That, for me, is the paradigm of creativity, Jesus creates this moment when he does that. And it's like great art, it's unexpected, it's infuriating, and can be infuriating. Great art can be infuriating. I've got this whole list of adjectives of that was. But I read all those to you. I read that essay. I'm not going to read that whole essay to you again. You're welcome. So Jesus is our pattern, I'm recapping, for the creative life. And that scribbling in the sand was really the illustrative moment. Okay? So we talked about how creativity begins with listening. And what's Jesus' favorite verse? Deuteronomy 6, the Shema. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and with everything you are." And so from the Shema, we learn that the best way to love God, the best way to love anybody, is to listen to them. And creativity begins with listening. It's a listening stance. So the question is, what do we listen to? And then we looked at what it means to listen to the Hebrew Bible, what it means to listen to the Torah, the writings, and the prophets. And the Torah, if we listen, we hear what is called, and I didn't come up with this. This is people like Calvin Searville came up with this. It's called the creative mandate. Genesis 1:28, to go and be fruitful and that sort of thing. And that's just not a commandment to make babies. That's a commandment to enculture the world. And so in the Torah, the first 5 books, there's all sorts of creativity. Noah, later on there's the building of the tabernacle. We have the Tower of Babel incident, which is an example of creativity gone wrong. People creating for their own glory, sort of out of their own. So that's what happened when we listen to the Torah. Then we listen to the writings, Job, Proverbs, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Hey, Ruth. And it's always looking to see if she's got my gingerbread. That's what I had for supper. I had your gingerbread for supper tonight, and it was awesome, by the way. So we listened to the writings, and what we hear, at least what I heard, was a preoccupation with a new song. Sorry, I'm getting kind of concentrated again. I got my mind on gingerbread now. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, hey, Grace. Yeah, glad you could join us. So we listen to the writings. We hear a preoccupation with singing the new song. The new songs are for community, and the new songs accompany movements of the Spirit. In Revelation 14:3, at the final inbreaking of the kingdom, they sing a new song. This preoccupation with new songs is something that goes straight through Scripture, and so it has to do with God. God's on the move when there's a new song. And we see that in the writings. And then finally, the prophets, we see the category is recapturing the imagination. What is God doing through all of these, bizarre images in the prophets? The trees clap their hands, the sun hides its face, and that sort of thing. The prophets, through the prophets, God is reaching out to our imaginations to try to recapture us. Okay. Then last week we talked about creativity and community and what the gifts of community are to creativity, and we're going to look at that in a little more detail tonight. And then finally, we're going to start tonight. We're going to talk about creating out of the overflow of the heart. And tonight's our last night, so we're going to sum it up tonight. Okay, so this is Matthew 12. I'm going to start at 33. Hey, either make the tree good and its fruit will be good, or make the tree bad and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, so he's mad when he says this. How can you speak good things when you're evil? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. That's the principle we're looking for, the overflow. And so the question is, how do you create the overflow? And Jesus will make the point, there's bad overflow and there's good overflow. A good person produces good things from his storeroom of good, and an evil person produces evil things from his storeroom of evil. I'll tell you that on that day of judgment, people will have to count for every careless word. So on he goes. But there's the principle of the overflow of the heart. So we're going to talk about creativity. I think it's a really good question. How do I maintain this? What do I do so that I can have this good store in my heart to create out of? Because we don't create out of nothing, right? Only God creates out of nothing, ex nihilo. So we use pre-existing forms. So let's talk a little bit about that. In Matthew 12:34, Jesus tells us that the words we are speaking are nothing more or less than a result of the content of our hearts. They are the fruit that is born of the tree that is us. For the Christian, what fills the heart is determined by the quality of our devotional life. The overflow of the heart is maintained by the time we spend together listening to God in prayer, listening to His Word, listening in worship, and listening to each other in fellowship. So those are sort of the categories we're gonna look at. But it's interesting how it always goes back to the Shema. It always goes back to listening. I was riding in this morning and this evening to do this, and I'd had a hard afternoon with my granddaughter. My granddaughter didn't want me to take her home. She wanted my wife, Mamie, to take her home. And so the whole way home, she's crying. I mean, it was just driving me nuts. And then I get in traffic. I'm not good with traffic, and I drove from Fairview into here, and I'm not in a good place. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to talk about listening to you, Jesus. Listen, let me listen to you as I'm driving, because driving, I think, is a good time to pray. And I'm straining and trying to think, well, I'm not just making this up. Am I really hearing him say this to me? Am I the only person that goes through this? Okay, and I'm thinking, what would he say? What is he saying to me? And what I heard was, friend, you're my friend. I go, okay, well, I'm good with that. I'm good. Can you do something about this traffic? Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Okay, if I go over this next hill, please let the road be completely clear. Anyway, don't get me into talking about that. So let's talk about the listening heart. The listening heart. My note says, do we listen as if our lives depended on it? Because our lives really do depend on the quality of our listening. Central key to meaningful time spent in all the areas of devotion, and it's a concept I think that's too little discussed, is listening. We're encouraged to open our hearts. We're to share our burdens with God and one another, but the single factor which raises our devotional time out of mere routine, I believe, is the quality of listening. I don't know if you went in college. I went through my Mother Teresa period. And this whole idea of listening to God and that God speaks in the silence of the heart, and all those the great church fathers that were involved in listening. So this is a song I wrote about listening to the Word. The word is living. The Word is light. The word delights my soul and preserves my life, holy and hidden, forever new. The word is wisdom, the word is true. The word takes all that's old and makes it new. When hearts are broken, it makes them whole. The word is wounded time and again. The word is suffering still for those in sin. He's always with us. Believe it's true. The cross speaks this advice. Trust me, Jesus Christ. Basic to the art of listening is allowing the other person to speak. This may sound overly simple, but in fact, it's a major task. When it comes to allowing the Bible to speak for itself, that means listening with as few presuppositions as possible. I don't know if I've confessed this to you, but I struggle sometimes when my wife is talking. I struggle listening. Why? Because I know what she's going to say. And I'm always right. I mean, I know her so well. I know what she's going to say. And so you stop listening. And we do that to the Bible. I think, at least I do that to the Bible. I know what the next verse is going to say. Usually, if it's in the Gospels, I know what the next verse. And I stop listening. Well, that's not being a good listener, right? And it's at least one argument for fresh translations that you aren't overly familiar with. So my concept is, I say, don't finish the Bible sentences for it, because that's what I do to my wife. It drives her absolutely nuts. Don't finish the Bible sentences for it. That's not listening. So these are just some points on listening. Another way we fail in listening to the Bible is reading only for theological affirmation. I don't know if y'all are guilty of that. But you read the baptism of Jesus, and that's just a proof text for immersion. Right? Or the crucifixion is this necessary piece of the puzzle of redemption, and not a heartbreaking moment of transformation. I mean, if you're getting it and really listening, there should probably be a tear in your eye when you read of the crucifixion. And for me, and I think if we're talking about creativity, and I'm confessing way too much tonight, but the Bible, these passages become fodder for lyrics. I'm not going to name this person, but I know a songwriter in Nashville who keeps his Bible on the piano, because that's the only time he opens it is when he's writing songs, right? And there's something really messed up about that. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but the simple act of quieting the mind and heart and allowing the Bible to speak as if it's never spoken to you in its own voice before, that'll transform your time with the Word. Be quiet, be patient, and let the Bible say what it has to say, okay? And finally, and this is just another little tip, and I don't know who I got this from, but it was some spiritual discipline book I read. Hearing the Word in your own voice. Have you ever tried reading the Word out loud to yourself? It's really interesting what happens when you hear your own voice reading the Bible. And did you know, in the ancient world, all reading was done out loud. That's just how you learn to read. That's how Philip knows what the Ethiopian eunuch, or the Ethiopian eunuch knows. Philip knows? What? Yeah, in Acts 8. He knows what he's reading because he's reading out loud, because all reading is done out loud. So in one sense, the Bible was a book that was written to be read out loud. How cool is that? So there's something about hearing the sound of your own voice speaking the words of Scripture. And so find new ways to hear the Bible. Personally, I'm so picky when it comes to people reading the Bible. I had the old Charlton Heston version of him reading the Bible, and I love Charlton Heston, but it wouldn't work for me. But if you know who David Suchet is, the guy who plays Poirot, he has read through he's a believer. His version of him reading through the Bible is incredible. He's done his homework. The pronunciations are all right. He's not overly dramatic. It's just this very pleasant, beautiful, accent. Yeah, he does talk a little funny because he's English. But other than that, it's the English NIV, which is different than the American NIV. Yeah. Huh? I'll tell you, the only thing wrong with it is he says "et." instead of 8. And that drive. But otherwise, it's, yeah. You et? Et? Who says et? Spell that word, A-T-E. How do you get et out of A-T-E? Anyway, but if you're looking for another version to listen to, David Suchet is brilliant. Yeah, except that he mispronounces that. Thank you for joining us. Come on in. Right. Okay. So, yeah. So that's listening to the word. So let's talk about listening to silence, listening to the silence of prayer. Prayer teaches us that we do not only listen to words. And here's a lyric. Forgive me for reading you lyrics, but it has to do with what I'm talking about. So this is a song called "In Stillness and Simplicity." In stillness and simplicity, in the silence of the heart, I see the mystery of eternity who lives inside of me. In stillness and simplicity, I hear the Spirit's silent plea that you, O Lord, are near to me in stillness and simplicity. This is the bridge. You're the word who must be heard by those who listen quietly. Is the reason we're not still to hear you speak because we don't believe you will. In stillness and simplicity, I lose myself in finding thee, and you, O Lord, are close to me in stillness and simplicity. So seek the one who dwells in you. The Spirit that's within is true, the innermost reality in stillness and simplicity. My note says, why are we so afraid of silence? The answer is, it says too much. One of the greatest privileges of my life, Eberhard Bethge, if you know Bonhoeffer, his work, the book Letters and Papers from Prison, those were written primarily to his friend, Eberhard Bethge. And when I was at Western, millennia ago, Eberhard Bethge came. We had a Bonhoeffer Society, and he came and spoke to our Bonhoeffer Society. And I think I was 19, and I got to go to the airport and pick him up. Yeah. His wife, Renata, is with him, and she's niece. So there's this old German guy, and he's about 80 years old, and I got to talk to them in the car all the way from Nashville to Bowling Green when I was at Western Kentucky University. And I had the privilege of spending a whole week with this guy and every night hearing him speak on Bonhoeffer, and it was life-changing. And he told a story, and I bring that up just to tell the story. He said Bonhoeffer it's a group of seminarians that are meeting during, World War II. Right, Hitler's closed down in Germany. Hitler's closed down all the seminaries. And so Bonhoeffer's out in the country teaching these young seminarians. And he had assigned the seminarians to pray an hour a day. And they pretended that they were doing it for a while. But then finally Bethge said, he came to Bonhoeffer and said, you cannot expect us to pray for an hour every day. Our homes are being bombed. Our wives are, and some of them weren't married. Our fiancés are in danger. You can't expect us. He said, our minds wander. He said, Bonhoeffer smiled and said, that's good. Let your mind wander and follow it wherever it goes. You don't fight your mind when you're listening to the silence. You follow your mind, and he said, wherever your mind ends up, take that matter and take it to prayer. And Bonhoeffer had this wonderful idea of this is how we, listen to the silence. And when your mind wanders, you follow your mind wherever it goes. And he said fighting only leads to more noise and inner turmoil. I thought that was a brilliant observation. I mean, Bonhoeffer, come on. Has everyone please read Christ the Center? I mean, his best book is Cost of Discipleship, his most famous book. But he wrote a book called Christ the Center, which is absolutely fabulous. It's about Jesus being the center of understanding everything. And I'm trying to apply this to creativity. I mean, if we're going to understand creativity, how about we understand it through Christ, through whom everything was made? Maybe he's a pretty good person too, right? That's John 1, Colossians 1, and Hebrews 1. Everything that was made through him. And he even holds things together. So something like gravity. I mean, Jesus is, he's everything. So he's everything to me. I'm sure he's everything to you too. We must learn in prayer to let the other person speak. We all have friends who dominate the conversation. Are you that sort of friend to God? After all, ask yourself who has the more worthwhile things to say. Many books have been written on prayer, some of them helpful. For more than a couple of years, I was absorbed in reading books about prayer, and then I finally discovered maybe the best way to learn about prayer is to pray. So, and it's with my head bowed that I even talk about prayer because my prayer life is miserable. Boy, I'm confessing way too much tonight. Let's talk about breaking some old habits. As in Bible reading, sometimes talk about prayer, it's helpful to break old habits. If your prayers seem too long, simply pray the Lord's Prayer. The simplicity of it is refreshing and more time will be left for listening. Remember, Jesus gave this prayer in response to the question, teach us to pray. So maybe it's a pretty good prayer, and we all know it. So praying too long is not my problem, though. Praying too short is my problem. The first step to listening prayer is quieting your mind. When that inner voice starts to chatter, sometimes maybe you just repeat to yourself, be still and know that I'm God. And that will help you focus. So those are a couple of little hints. This is from Bill Lane. Your physical attitude is important in prayer. Again, there's no prescribed position. Some find it best to kneel. I've heard it said that the discomfort from kneeling helps some people focus. Jesus' brother James was said to have knees like a camel because he prayed so much. Have you heard of that? Yeah, James they called him camel knees because his knees were all calloused from praying all the time. Bill Lane used to sit upright in a comfortable chair. And he said that was his position for prayer. Some people walk, some people drive, some people lay face down. And if you're locked into one position, perhaps changing will help. So that's just another little tip coming from all the way from Bill Lane. Most important is remembering that prayer is in one sense conversation, and conversation involves listening. Okay? Prayer is listening. So listening to the word, listening to prayer, and finally, listening to your own life. I've got another song for you. Ephesians 2:10, Paul says that we are God's poema, God's masterpieces, God's artful creation. This is from the word poie, which just means to make things. So we are his it's the word that poems come from, though. We are his. It can't be translated poems. I wish it could, but but we are his artful creations. We are his poema. What are some translations? We're his workmanship. Yeah, workmanship. We're these things that he creates. So this is called the poem of your life. It's an Irish melody. Life is a song we must sing with our days, a poem with meaning more than words can say, a painting with colors no rainbow can tell, a lyric that rhymes either heaven or hell. We are living letters that doubt desecrates. We're the notes of the song of the chorus of faith. God shapes every second of our little lives and minds every minute as the universe waits by. This is the chorus. The pain and the longing, the joy and the moments of light are the rhythm and rhyme, the free verse of the poem of life. So look in the mirror and pray for the grace to tear off the masks and find the art of your face. Open your earlids. You got eyelids, you got earlids. Open your earlids and hear the sweet song of each moment that passes and pray to prolong your time in the ball of the dance of your days, your canvas of colors of moments of blaze, with all that is holy, with the joy and the strife of the rhythm and rhyme of the poem of your life. See, the idea is your life is a poem that God is speaking. So God speaks through the word of Scripture, through the silence of prayer, but he also speaks through the poem or the parable. Let's do it that way. The parable of your life. Abraham offering his son. That's a parable. I mean, it really happened, but it's parabolic. It's teaching us about how God will offer his son. Jacob wrestling with the angel. That really happened, but that's a parable. It's parabolic. God is speaking truth through the parables of their lives. Job's suffering is a parable about the truth that God doesn't always give us answers, but he always gives us himself. So it's a wonderful parable. Listening to the parables of Jesus will teach us how to listen to the parable of our lives. I mean, the parable, he's perfect, right? And he communicates, he teaches perfectly. And what's the main way he teaches? Is parables. Okay? So I would say it's the perfect form of teaching, this metaphorical, creative, imaginative thing that he does with parables. And Jesus' parables work two ways. They work, first of all, through identification. You hear a parable and you identify with the father who's waiting for the son to come back, or you identify with the older son who's really ticked off that the younger son is left with all the money, or maybe you're the younger son, or you're the woman who's been looking for this coin that you've lost. That's how his parables work. Identification, that's the first part of them. And the second way they work is lack of closure, because he doesn't usually finish them. And he never explains them. He explains one. He explains the seed parables to the disciples in private. But otherwise, with no introduction, Jesus steps up and he says, a man is going down the road. He fell into the hands of men of violence who stripped him and left him for dead. And he tells the story, and he concludes by saying, if you got ears to hear, you better listen. If you don't listen to this, you're not going to get it, is basically the paraphrase of what that means. That's how we understand Jesus' parables, but that's also how we understand the parables of our lives. We learn to listen to our lives by listening to the parables of Jesus. And so, what characters in your life do you identify with? What characters in your life do you find, help you find meaning or grace or those things that you need? That's really important to look at your own life and see who you identify with or who you don't identify with. And lack of closure. Anybody got lack of closure in their life? I mean, that's my life. Well, that's an invitation to listen to your life, right? To engage and really listen to your life, okay?
Can you give more example of what you mean by looking for examples in your life?
Okay, he said, can I give more examples of listening to your life? Yeah. Well, when I'm driving in today or tonight to come here, and I'm all caught up, and I'm worried about presenting, and I'm all nervous about my granddaughter, and I'm kind of a mess. And I stop and say, Jesus, I need to feel your presence. I need you to tell me who I am, because right now I'm just frazzled. And I hear this word friend. Well, there was this moment in my life, and I stopped and listened. And I don't know, if I hadn't been geared up to teach this, I don't know if I'd have done that. I was just been frustrated all the way into, and I would have snapped at Ruth, when I saw her, and, But that's an example. I took a walk today. I was kind of frustrated this morning. I took a walk. And I don't think there's ever a time that God hasn't met me on a walk. And that sort of thing. You find creative ways of listening to your life. God is speaking to you through the parable of your life. Yeah. And I also think what facilitates that ability to listen is listening to the Word. Right? My categories. I mean, when I'm trying to spend time with Jesus driving in here, well, I know that at one point Jesus says, I've called you friends. I go, yeah. So that I can validate that with Scripture. Does that make sense?
It does. Are you specifically, when you're talking about your life as a parable, you're talking about listening to your life, are you thinking of that in terms of a story in some sense?
Yeah, your life, yes, yeah. Okay. The way you listen to a story, who are the main characters. Well, even the word parable, parabole. Para means beside, bole is the word we get ball from. It means to throw. A parable is something you throw down. Okay, so Jesus makes a point, and he throws down this story. Okay, and I think your life has that quality. God is making a point. He's speaking into your life, and then these events happen, and I have to hope and trust and believe that God is speaking through my life, through the parables of my life. And, I'm trying to think of other examples. Well, Larry Crabb, y'all know Larry Crabb died last week. Yeah, and I was just crushed by that. And so I started to think he was really a big part of my life for a long time. Very, very gracious person. And losing someone, I think, does something to you that nothing else does. So I'm processing that. And it ripples all kinds of ways. But I'm trying to think. There's lots of examples. But beauty, I think, beauty speaks. I think, at least to me. I think it's the beauty of creation, beauty of your grandchildren, except for a few exceptions. So identification and lack of closure, those are the two. And there are probably others. I'm not pretending to have the squeeze this dry. This is just what I've experienced. Okay, I talked a little bit before about creativity and community, and we talked. I want to go in depth a little more on the gifts of community to creativity. You got anything I've said so far? Please don't disagree with me. I'm very fragile. I've had a hard day, so see me burst into tears. I really had a hard day. Okay, let's talk about creativity and how it flourishes within communities. One of the most, and again, we always go back to Jesus. The most deliberate thing Jesus did was create communities. He created 3 that I know of. The 3, the 12, and the 70. These concentric circles of intimacy. Right? He's got the 3, Peter, James, and John. And in terms of intimacy, how many people can you really be intimate with? I mean, you know everything about them. They can ask you anything. You can ask them anything. My best friend, Scott Rowley. Okay, I have 2 people like that in my life. My wife and Scott Rowley. Scott Rowley will say, "How you doing?" I'll say, "I'm fine." And he'll say, "Why'd you just lie to me?" Because he knows I'm not doing fine, right? How many people can you know that well? I think 3 is about the limit. 3's pushing it. So then the next circle of intimacy out, 12. How many people can you know pretty much all about their lives? They can call you at 3 a.m. and you're willing to come and, change their tire or something like that. That next level out of intimacy. I think the number 12 is kind of pushing it. I maybe have 5 or 6, 7 or 8 people like that in my life.
But the 3 are a subset of the 12.
They are.
So that's the concentric component, I guess.
Yeah, they're connected. I never thought of that. Okay, think about that some more and get back to me. And then I'll teach it like I thought of it. But I never thought of that. Yeah.
You need to make a Venn diagram.
Yeah, Venn diagram. Okay, get that to me by next week, okay? And in the 70, right? The 3, the 12, and the 70. And my thing with the 70 is, how many people's names do you even know? 70, I may know 70 people's names, I guess. But to me, those are circles of intimacy. And they're communities that Jesus delivered. 3 is symbolic because David had the 3, right? 12 is symbolic because of Israel, right? And he even tells the disciples that. They're going to sit and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. And 70, Moses has 70 elders. So they're biblical numbers anyway. So I think that's the deliberate way that Jesus creates. And then, of course, there's his body. That's the big one. But let's talk about the gifts of community to creativities. And I overviewed these last week, but I want to look at them in more detail. I've got 6. The first one is constructive criticism. And it's based on familiarity and trust because it's community. Communus means with walls. A community is a group, that has, the word means with walls. So we have these protective walls. So within these protective walls, based on familiarity and trust, I can receive constructive criticism. Now, when I first started doing music and a record comes out and someone I don't know says something mean, well, that's kind of hard to take if you're sensitive, right? But I grew up doing music in a little biracial church in Bowling Green, Kentucky, Cecilia Memorial Presbyterian Church. Our chief deaconess was Thelma Baker. And Thelma, every time I wrote a new song, here come Thelma after the service. And she was the main critic. She was going to tell me what it was, whether it was good or not. And usually she was pretty critical. But she loved me more when I wrote a bad song. That's the gift of community. And that's how you get better. You get constructive criticism from someone who loves you more when you write a bad song or paint a bad picture or whatever. That's one of the gifts of community. And I was involved in creativity for so many years, mainly because of Thelma Baker. I don't know if I could have done it without Thelma. Criticism, let's see. Yeah, criticism takes place in the public forum. It takes place after the fact in reviews and magazines. This type of criticism is rarely constructive. Its source is someone often unknown to the artist and therefore unfamiliar and difficult to trust, especially when it's negative. So that's one of the gifts of community, constructive criticisms. The second one is apprenticeship. And apprenticeship is creativity based on this ongoing relationship. And that comes from, that's in the Renaissance, right? Da Vinci and Michelangelo and all these people, they apprenticed people, and they were apprenticed by other people. And so, hey, not too shabby, creativity coming from that kind of apprenticeship. I was apprenticed by a content person. William Lane was the person who kind of apprenticed me. And he would give me his sermons and say, write me a song about this. And I would write a lyric and give it to him. And he would, say, this works, this, you missed it, you didn't miss it, or you got it, or whatever. And again, I didn't have all these categories. This just naturally happened, right? So apprenticeship, my note says, apprenticeship is discouraged primarily for two reasons. First, the commercial system is based on individualism or celebrityism. And second, production schedules rarely afford the time for someone to be matured in his or her craft. Because apprentice, that takes time. That takes time. I was with him for 6 years. Well, I was with him for 26 years, but in school I was with him for 6 years. So he's the first person ever asked me to write a song. I would have never written music if it wasn't for Bill Lane. So, yeah, he said, you play the guitar, don't you, Mr. Card? I said, yes, sir, but guitars were for attracting girls in college, right? Sit in the student center and play the guitar, right? And that Sunday he said, here's my sermon. It was John 21, second miraculous catch of fish. He gives me a sermon all outlined with 3 points and I would love to say that I heard God speak and I'm spiritual and religious and I did it to please God. I did it to please Bill. Right? But that's another wonderful thing is that God uses our mixed motives, doesn't he? Because that's all he's got to work with. Right? That's all he's got to work with. Okay. Another thing that community gives us is aesthetic accountability. And this is something I got from Jack Redford. Jack is a wonderful string writer and orchestrator who lives in California. And he taught me about this. Aesthetic accountability. We use accountability usually in moral and other areas, but within the context of community, we're held accountable aesthetically. My note says aesthetic accountability becomes the responsibility of the individual artist in the world and tends to be shaped not by any absolutes or by what seems to be, but by what seems to be successful in terms of commercial success. Immediate success, usually but not always, wins out over what would otherwise aesthetically be more beneficial. I'm responding to negative things in the culture. Okay? So the fourth gift of community to creativity is the freedom to experiment. Again, it's based on the ability to fail, on trust. You're free to experiment, and you've got to be able to experiment if you're going to create. You don't have, and I'm speaking from the music business. Music business doesn't do that. You do one bad album, one bad song, you're out of here. Here's my negative thing on commerciality. Within the confines of commerciality, there's little room to experiment. A limited number of visionaries are allowed if it works, if their stuff works. Their freedom to experiment most often comes from past successes. Due to the risk involved in carrying these individuals, the industry can afford only a few of them. And my example is, I don't know if you remember Steve Taylor. In Christian music, there was this, crazy guy who was incredibly creative. And no one ever heard any songs like his, but it was, and it worked. It worked. So I don't know. He is my best example that I can think of someone who had the freedom to experiment.
So do you want to be a clone?
Oh yeah, do you want to be a clone? Yeah. And what great language. Yeah. And that song especially drew you in. You had to figure out what he was saying, right? Yeah. And he looked like Abraham Lincoln. That was pretty cool too. Number 5, the basic notion of craft. That is, craftsmanship comes to us from community. Craftsmanship is lost, again, in what's expedient, profitable. The quality of a handmade instrument that took a year to craft is not as valuable in the marketplace, where in the same time for less money, 1,000 factory instruments can be coughed out. Boy, so negative. Okay, and then finally, acceptance. One of the gifts of community is acceptance. Right or wrong, I'm on your side. I think we talked about that last week. Acceptance is one in the commercial realm based on a value system founded on quantity over quality, expediency over craftsmanship, saleability over vision. Relationship, trust, and accountability are concepts which are not commonly seen. As we consider the crisis in creativity within the church today, we talked about that at our first session, didn't we? That there really is a crisis in creativity in the church. The believing community is a safe place in which a biblical value system is protected, nurtured. Those artists that are fledglings from the nest, mixed metaphor, are taught to fly within the safety of a flock. Oh gosh, horrible. I can't believe I wrote that. How embarrassing. But that
I said we're on your side.
yeah, see, there it is. There it is. I can write a really crappy sentence like that and you're still on my side. Thank you for proving my point. And I really think Belmont was a place like that. It was a creative, still is as far as I know, a creative community. It's this place where you're safe, you're free to fail. Your acceptability isn't based on your performance. Did I tell you about getting in trouble when I was a little kid in church? My best friend growing up was a 65-year-old man. His name was Basil Edwards. He had just retired. I'm 6, he's 65. And I sat with him every Sunday in church. He had a pocket full of candy, and I would sit next to him and eat candy all through the service. I got in trouble one Sunday. I forgot what it was for, but I must have done something horrible because I was in big trouble. And I'm crying and all upset. And Mr. Edwards got down on his knees, hands and knees, in my face. And he goes, "Mike, you're wrong. What you did was wrong." I'm like, And he said, "I want you to know I'm on your side." Changed my life. He said, "You're wrong, and I'm on your side." And that's what Jesus does. Jesus gets down in our face. He says, "You're wrong, and I'm going to be on your side. I'm going to choose to side with you." And that's something that community. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the crisis of creativity in the church? I think you did touch a bit on it, but what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think I came up with that term maybe 10 years ago when I was thinking about Christian music. And what I saw as the commerciality of, we're all kind of roughly the same age, roughly. But I don't know if you remember a time when in Christian music, basically, if there was a secular hit, within about 6 or 8 weeks, there was a Christian song that was a copy of that, except with Christian lyrics. And the industry encouraged that. And I was outraged. I was just morally outraged by that. Of course, I did that too. I mean, I'm guilty of everything that anybody else is guilty of. But that's what I saw as a crisis of creativity. The church, we were just sort of copying the world. And there was a lot of money involved, and I was just outraged by that. So that's where that comes from. Yeah. And I think since I'm kind of out of the flow of things, I've lost that critical. I don't know what's going on now in Christian music, and I don't really want to be critical like that anymore. I want to be, I want to do my thing. So I think it was taken away. So.
Mike, do you think there's any way you could think of it as reframing and recapturing something that had melodic quality but redeeming the lyrics?
Well, I think, yes. Yes, I think that can happen. Yeah, I do. I mean, I learned from, listening to James Taylor and Dan Fogelberg and people like that. And I think I stole all their chords and all their progressions. So, yeah. But okay, here's another confession. Oh, gosh. I did, the first record or two I did, I did with Randy Scruggs, who was a boyhood friend, okay, and a great musician. He's since gone on to be with the Lord. But then at one point, the record company said, well, and at that point, Dan Fogelberg was my hero, and I tried to sound like Dan Fogelberg. I had lots of harmonies, and, I was into that. And I think maybe you only hate things in other people because you know they're in yourself. And I was so mad at the Christian industry because I guess I knew I was really doing that. Of course, I wouldn't confess that to myself. So anyway, at one point, the record company said, well, let's get you with another producer, right? Just to try to do something different. Well, the only other producer whose name I knew was Norbert Putnam, Dan Fogelberg's producer, right? So I thought, hey, okay. So I start meeting with Norbert, who at that point isn't even a believer. I mean, it was absurd that I was even talking to him, that he would even talk to me. Okay. So anyway, so he listened to my music and he goes, yeah, this is really good. We can do something with this. And I said, yeah, I'm really excited because I want to sound like Dan Fogelberg. He goes, He said, if I work for you, my job is going to make you not to sound like him. And so for 8 years, we just fought. We made records. We made a bunch of records, but I would always want to do whatever it was I thought Dan Fogelberg would do. And if he thought that, we did the opposite. Okay? So yes, I think I was borrowing from those forms. And sometimes it was with a good and sincere heart, and sometimes it was with not such a good. So, the heart is infinitely twisted, at least mine is. Yeah, I've confessed way too much stuff tonight. So let me sum up. Here's my summary. And the title of it is Life Lived as a Whole. Developing a biblical value system. Earlier, we spoke about refusing to compartmentalize our lives, about living life as a whole. Our paradigm is the life of Jesus, specifically in the area of creativity. Jesus' life demonstrates an awareness that marvelous creativity can be spent on even the most seemingly insignificant encounter. I mean, what is the focus of Jesus' creativity? It's the way he treats people. Right? He doesn't paint pictures, doesn't write books. I mean, he teaches. I get that. That's a focus of his creativity. But for me, when I read the Gospels, that's where he's really creative. Right? The woman taken in adultery is one of those. The woman at the well is another great example. Here's this person who's bitter and who's been abused by men and that sort of thing. And Jesus finds a way to, speak to her heart and changes her life. I mean, I think that was the major focus, if not the major focus of his creativity. Sitting alone, tired and thirsty beside a well, a situation which for most of us would bring about the most self-centered response. I'm tired, I'm thirsty, who's the bimbo with a water jar? Jesus, eccentric outside of himself, asking for a drink, reaches out, engages, mystifies, finds just the right words to draw this battered woman out of her shell. For the one who refuses to close off slots of time or areas of their life for creativity, there are no ordinary moments. The door is always open to the adventure of what might be in terms of creativity. Foundational and formational of biblical value system is the conviction that all our life is to be lived as a whole, that those things which are deemed valuable are valuable all the time and in every area of life. Likewise, those things which are worthless are always worthless in every situation. Silence is always desirable, if not always possible. Simplicity is always to be pursued, even in the face of overwhelming complexity. The developing of a biblical value system is a task that is left to each individual Christian. It's not that each system is individualistic. Some things are wrong for you, but not for me. The point is that in order to truly possess this kind of biblical value system, in order for it to be truly yours, to be new, you must construct it yourself, must realize it for yourself. Certainly the systems of others can be vital to us and are helpful to us. Their experience is invaluable, but you and I come to the task with our own unique life, our own intuitions, our own combination of weaknesses and strengths. It's most helpful to begin by laying out the right questions and not simply providing answers. You must decide this for yourself. And here's a couple of questions, and then I'm done. What's the relationship between quality and quantity? Is more always better? And I got bunches of Bible verses. Do you want these? Do you want to write down Bible verses or? You do? Okay. Proverbs 15:16, 16:8, and Luke 9:25. Second question, to what extent can a person give themselves to their art? Deuteronomy 6:5, I think we all know what that is. Deuteronomy 10:12, Colossians 3:23, and 1 Peter 4:11. How about this? What value does the family have in light of creative success? 1 Timothy 5:4 and 8. To what extent should we value specifically gifted individuals? That's a good question. Romans 12:3, 1 Corinthians 1:31, and 1 Corinthians 4:7. And behind that is the idea that you're not your gift. Your value doesn't come from your giftedness. It comes from your who you are in Christ. Is the power of the medium, and for example, music, to be feared? Ezekiel 26:13. That's all I got. I had some more, but I left them at home. So those are just some questions. So that's all I got.
Okay, one question.
Okay.
If you have more than 12 people in a group,
What?
how do you, if you have more than 12 people in a group, how do you get rid of those extra people?
Oh. Well. Yeah, I think the point. I get the joke of that, but I think maybe, and you tell me if this is true or not. I think maybe the reason we can have the 3, the 12, and the 70 is that we're always open. I'm not going to be closed, to someone who wants to come. But maybe they're the 3, or maybe they're the 12, maybe they're the 70. I don't know. Yes.
Okay, I know there's a simple answer of more of God, but how do you keep music and the arts from becoming an idol?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one of those questions was, what was it? The last one I gave. The power of the medium, is it to be feared? No, that's the opposite of what you just said. Well, I think when people idolize music, what they intend to be doing, if they're musicians, is they idolize their gift, or it's involve yourself. And again, when Jesus being your pattern, I don't want to say fixes everything, but it kind of does, because if what you're doing artistically can be understood as washing people's feet, you're okay. So is this art that washes someone's feet? So it's not about me. It's about finding what their needs are and responding to those, which again is the church is a wonderful, writing songs in response to people's needs or something that someone's struggling with. It's not about you, and it's not about being on the radio or drawing attention to yourself. I think maybe that's one of the gifts of community. You don't idolize. We're not going to let you do that. We're going to hold you accountable as not only aesthetically. That song really stinks. I can remember Thelma Baker. I talked about Thelma. I wrote a song one time, and she came to me and said, "Why did you even sing that?" Because it was really bad. But she had the freedom to do that, and she loved me more. She was loving me by saying, you really missed it. And so maybe in community we can lovingly say, you know what? Worship leader was a little too focused on themselves, and let's help them with that. I don't know, or the songwriter, or I don't know. Does that help at all? I mean, I don't have definitive answers to that, but I do know that understanding things through Christ and being in community fix a lot of these things, because you'll see people who aren't in community. Creative people who really have no community. They're sort of lone rangers, and they fall prey to a lot of these things. all kinds of accountability. Community gives you a lot of that. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I do. So this is kind of a related question.
Okay.
So in the performing aspect, that easily becomes an idol as well.
Yeah.
And I know the answer is similar, but can you speak to that as well?
Well, again, I'm confessing so much. This is 6 years of counseling. Very early in my experience with this counselor, he said, "You're an affirmation junkie." And I realized, yeah, if you affirm me, I'll get in a car. I've got to go play in Kansas City in a couple of weeks. I'm going to get in a car and drive 9 hours to play for 30 minutes. And do I do that because I'm a deeply spiritual guy? No, I get affirmed, right? But I confess that I've got mixed motives. That's all I've got. And will you use this? Will you use my mixed motives? And that, for me and my sort of sinfulness, that's the best I've come up with. And by grace, sometimes you do things for the right reason. But I don't leave home for a month at a time because I'm deeply spiritual. I want to serve God. I do want to serve God, but I'm not. You all know I'm not deeply spiritual. But He uses everything, even the bad stuff. Does that sound heretical? That sounds heretical. No. But, yeah. And He created me this way, so He knows I need to be affirmed. We all need to be affirmed, right? So, is it one of the...
Labeled as one of the 5 love languages.
Well, there you go.
Affirmation.
There you go. And now I'm not going to confess that. That's too much. But there are reasons why I am an affirmation junkie, from growing up. And God uses those things, and He redeems those things. So I think maybe another aspect of listening to your life is you listen to those weaknesses and you see God uses those things. He uses everything, especially our weaknesses, because that's mostly what He has to work with. And we all know incredibly gifted people. There are the Phil Kagys and the people like people who sing like Steve Green and people like that, and that's awesome that God gives people that way. But we're not all of us are in that boat, are we? And so I'm glad He uses weaknesses. Yeah, I got a lot of that.
Yes, I have a question for you, Michael. Now, one thing I've noticed that, in the days of old, so to speak, that the contemporary Christian business was unashamedly and rapidly and entirely derivative of things going on in the world.
Sure.
I think now it's perhaps moved to being entirely derivative of homegrown Christian superstars with more of an accent on image and then talent than holiness.
I don't know.
But at its best, even, it seems that our music has somehow become entirely derivative. And I'm wondering what we might be able to do to inculcate an appreciation for there's a certain complexity to some of the greatest music that was church music. Palestrina. Right. I mean, listen to Palestrina. You want to be a Catholic.
Yeah.
Johann Sebastian Bach was a guy with a gig.
Yeah, he spent his whole life getting ready for church. Bach did.
And he never had the gig he wanted, but he seemed to,
But let me quickly say this. There are a lot of incredibly creative people who are doing, unbelievable stuff. It's just that given this creativity based on capitalism is just not the best way to do it. Yeah. But there are lots of incredible, Jack Redford, who I mentioned before, he's writing symphonies and all these incredible pieces of work. Well, you're not going to hear those on the Christian radio station. And I know some songwriters who are writing unbelievable stuff, biblical stuff and beautiful stuff. It's just that machine doesn't tend to support. It will support a few of those people, but so I think the commerciality comes from that. It's not that God isn't inspiring people and people aren't being creative. They are.
No, I quite agree with you
Yeah.
on that. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas for richening the soil into which all these wonderful seeds can flourish and grow. I
Yeah.
mean, why not when you have this industry that is
Well,
even the commercial industry, but how commercial is it? It's not even that good at making money anymore. Maybe we could do something better.
well, my solution is to bring those people into the church. You know, how many churches have a staff composer? So that in the context of community, there's a person that's, their monthly nut or whatever is taken care of, and they can be creative. They're not worried about whatever. And historically, that was Bach's gig, right? He was a church guy.
Wrote it all from scratch.
Right, and the players were all church. I don't know how that worked. I don't know enough about classical music to know.
Clavier was an improvisation method.
Yeah. Well, that to me would be a wonderful thing if churches would have staff composers or staff. I'm not just the organist or the worship leaders, whatever, but creatives that were writing and stuff as a part of the staff. But see, I don't think the churches valued that enough. So that would be how cool would that be?
We had at the Solemn Assembly, Kimber and Trey's offering for Psalm 103. I don't know if you heard it, but
No.
they're starting to write some great stuff, and it's beautiful because it was a real God thing capturing.
Yeah.
This time here at Belmont, and hopefully it'll be useful to others as well. But we want to encourage that, no?
Yeah, and those people will be writing for the needs of the community, So I think that, and not for the needs of the industry, but the industry I think is pretty much gone. I'll tell you what happened, and at least in my approximation, CCM happened, and it didn't fulfill, I think, what it should have done, and so a worship movement started. But then the worship movement became commercialized, and all of a sudden we had worship leader stars with big records, and so the same thing happened. At least that's me understanding it, and I think those two instances is where I thought, man, it'd be great if it could just be pulled back into the church, and we could support and all those gifts of community. That all happens, see, in the context of community, because none of it happens in the industry. I can tell you that. This is 40 years of experience. So. But God uses everything. That's the good news, right? Yeah.
Anyone else? Any questions for Mike?
So the point of all this has just been to encourage you guys and present Christ as our creative pattern. I don't want to get off into negative stuff about the Christian music industry. I want to end it with that. He is our pattern of the creative life, and he spends his creativity loving people well and listening to people well. And that's how I want my creativity to be spent. I want to spend it the way Jesus spent his. So that helps. Yeah.
Could you give us an idea of what you might be doing next week?
Yeah,
onwards?
I'm 4 more weeks. I'm 4 more weeks here, and what I wanted to do is 4 weeks basically on Jesus' world. But we'll take it from. It's not just going to be a lecture on who are the Sadducees and who are the Pharisees, that sort of stuff. Biblically, I want to demonstrate who are the people in his world and physically what his world is like, because it's not complicated, but I think it's important to get in your head, that Galilee is in the north and it takes him a week to walk to Jerusalem. Jesus spends 3 months out of every year walking back and forth to Jerusalem. I find that amazing. And we have a pretty good idea of what route, I think maybe he took a couple of different routes. And we can look at stuff like that. The woman at the well, he encounters her in Samaria. He's on his way to Jerusalem. So that's what I was thinking about doing, just different elements of Jesus' world. I want to talk again, illustrate it from the Gospels about how fragmented his world is. I just finished a book on the Judaisms of Jesus' time, and we just need to get this clear in our head that Jesus lives in this incredibly fragmented time. There is no Judaism in Jesus' day. There are Judaisms, and you already know this from reading the Gospels. we have what was called Israelite religion that was fairly unified, but then we have Rabbinic Judaism in Jesus' day, the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, and it's all splintered. And I think it's important in understanding his world. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna look at this fragment of his world. We're gonna look at the people in his world, Pharisees, Sadducees, that kind of thing. I'm not sure what the third or fourth one's gonna be, but I've got a lot of content, so I'll figure something out. Does that sound good to you, or is there something else? If it has to do with Life of Jesus, I've got lots of content on Life of Jesus. So,
That's exciting.
okay. We're going to look at the plots. We'll spend one whole time just looking at all the plots and when they started and who started them. And it started Mark 3. The plots begin as early as Mark 3. So I'm diagramming all that right now, getting that in my head. So, yeah, we'll look at the plots. I'm trying to remember what I'm doing this Sunday, but I'm doing one of those kind of things this Sunday, but I can't remember what it is. So let me pray. Lord, help us to spend our time and our minds on you and understanding, in every area of our life how you, I want to say fit in, but that's not the right word, how you belong in the center of every area of our life and how you transform. And we just want to know you better. So that's what we're asking. Open our hearts and our minds. Help us to learn more about you from being together, from our community that you've given us, from this great community at Belmont. We just want to know you better. And we hope and we believe and we trust that you'll honor that. And that would be great. Give us joy. So we give you the rest of this evening. I pray for all my brothers and sisters that they would be unusually aware of your presence with them as they go home. That those who go home to families will be especially full of your presence and your spirit, and that those who go back to empty apartments or empty houses would sense your presence there in fresh ways and in unusual ways. So we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.